my YouTube station at Michael Cross. It's Michael Cross says Michael Cross Freedom of Conscience after my book series. And I've got dozens of shows recorded. Also check out articles I've written on this subject and many others at my website at michaelcross.net. Okay, well, tonight, I'm not going to disappoint you. We have a really great guest. Her name is Sandra L Brown, and she's an author and counselor, and she deals with the subject of psychopaths, which, in today's world, if you turn on the TV, they're there. But not just out in the world of politics, but also many people face this kind of thing at home. So anyway, Sandra, tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you started in this really interesting field.
Thanks for having me on tonight, Mike. I appreciate it. I feel like I entered the field of psychopathology on May 13th, 1983, when my father was murdered by someone with a very long criminal career that looks very much, smells very much, acts very much like psychopathy. And I was not in the psychology field at that time. I was just a 20-something-year-old working in the marketing field when this happened. And, of course, in a moment's eye, my life was changed in that moment. And I could not conceive of a mind that could stab someone to death. And so that sort of began my interest in reading about low conscience disorders and what was related to that. I was sort of a late bloomer. I didn't go to college until I was 30, following the murder, and wanted to help, other people who had been impacted by the issue of low conscience. I still didn't know what that meant totally until in my master's degree program when I started studying personality disorders and psychopathy. And so since that time, which has been over 25 years, my practice has been solely focused on partners who have been in relationships with people that have, personality disorders and psychopathy. But I came in through the door of victimization. That's how I ended up becoming interested in the topic.
Well, I cannot even relate to that. The idea that, a family member being murdered, I think that's everyone's worst nightmare.
Well, absolutely. And, trying to understand who does that. That had been, a guiding mantra for me in trying to understand the whole issue of no conscience. It's the path that led me, to the work. And to the understanding about how psychopathy impacts everyday life. These are the people that are the most destructive people on the planet, and that cause, unimaginable kinds of harm. As we know, not all psychopaths end up in prison. Most of them live next door to us and work with us and date our daughters and sons. But by far, they do the most damage.
Well, it sounds like that until you started studying the issue, that I think like most people then, you were under the impression that everyone thinks the way that most people do, that you think that everyone has compassion, everyone has a conscience.
Yeah, until you are faced with a situation that makes you question what is conscience. Absolutely. And I think that's normal. We see the world through who we are, which is what puts us at risk for psychopaths when one is not a psychopath, because human nature is that we tend to see the world through who we are, and we see others and evaluate others through who we are. And when we have a conscience, we project, those positive traits and even human motivation onto other people. And, it's not until you meet someone without a conscience that your world is changed, and we're introduced to that other side of, I don't know if I even want to call it humanity, but that other side.
Well, I use the analogy when it comes to psychopaths and I'd like you to go into this into a lot more depth that I'm going to take this, but if you liken the human conscience to a computer, and when you're looking at the bars saying how much internet connection you have, if you're on full, you get like 5 bars light up. But if you're on some sort of Wi-Fi system and it's a really weak signal, then you're on like a 1. I mean, you're still getting something, but it's not much. You think that's the way a psychopath, that's how their conscience is? It's just so little that, or do you think it just doesn't exist at all? I mean, what's your opinion of that?
Well, we work sort of in the whole cluster of what we call low conscience, which is, cluster B personality disorders all the way up through and including psychopathy. And I call that the low conscience spectrum, that psychopaths, are on the high end of low or no conscience. Yeah, a narcissist, is a step down, will have some level of conscience. But in my book, Women Who Love Psychopaths, I talk about this issue about reduced conscience, and that this is the factor that causes inevitable harm. It is that it's our conscience that directs our behavior and our moral and spiritual context. It's what puts the brakes on behavior. And when you have not enough conscience, whether that is narcissism or whether it's full-blown psychopathy, you have the potential to harm non-pathological people. It's inevitable because there is not enough conscience to put the brakes on behavior. And so, in the book I talk about that. They don't have to be, a full-blown psychopath for you to be injured and emotionally, psychologically, physically, sexually, spiritually in a relationship. They can just have not enough conscience. That could be, narcissism or antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy. But anywhere in that range of not enough conscience or low conscience is, where inevitable harm happens.
Well, I'm wondering about that because Hare's scale goes from 0 to 40, if I recall right. And most people, I've even, you have to do it you have to diagnose in a clinical setting, but sometimes in a lecture hall, you can give the test out and see how people do. And the thing is that almost everyone gets around 0 to 8. It just seems that that's the norm. And then there's a small number who get maybe 20 on it. And then, of course, there's the ones that get 30 and above. I've never actually encountered someone with a 30 and above, when it comes to giving the test. I've interviewed a couple of people who scored higher than that and are diagnosed. But would you say that, what is that term? Is it like if you score around a 20, is that a red flag? Is that kind of a borderline psychopath? Someone that maybe there's like a yellow light going up instead of a red light, but it still has a lot of those characteristics?
They could be trait oriented, as they say. Here's the PCLR, the Psychopathy Checklist Revised, is solely for psychopathy. When people come in through the Institute, we try to assess the partner's descriptions of the behavior and lifestyle of their partner. And sometimes it will often fall within like full psychopathy or psychopathic traits. But we also assess for the other, low conscience disorders. So we look, at borderline, narcissist, antisocial, and psychopathic. And so Hare's particular thing is only looking, at psychopaths, where some of the other low conscience disorders may be in there too. And we often find that the partners end up being with people who have a little bit of traits of all of it. They are narcissistic, they are antisocial, and they are psychopathic. So they're sort of a cluster, but of a different kind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Just a quick question here, since you brought up borderline. I mean, it sounded like you talked about also BPD, borderline personality. Do you think a lot of women, when they get diagnosed, just if there's like a cultural thing in which many women who get the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder are actually psychopaths, but we just, the psychological profession tends to kind of look at it like, well, no, men are more likely to be psychopaths, so therefore maybe she's displaying BPD, which is more aimed towards, it seems, women.
I absolutely think that there is a gender bias against diagnosing women as psychopaths. Absolutely. Years ago, I worked in a women's trauma unit, inpatient psychiatric program, and many of the women had been underdiagnosed, had been diagnosed borderline when they really were psychopathic. And I think it's still true today that there is a gender bias of that. And Barbara Oakley, in her book, Evil Genes, wrote about that issue, about borderlines and psychopaths and sort of the problem that we face in diagnosing, especially women, and was talking about, trying to merge those two into an area she called a border path. And I would love to see that happen, because I think that's exactly what often happens, is that, especially with women, is that they will be diagnosed borderline and not psychopathic. And I think that female psychopaths are a little different than male psychopaths in their presentation and in their behavior in relationships.
Oh, okay. I got to go through that there, because that's the main character in my book series is a female psychopath, and in Freedom from Conscience. And so let's see if I got it right here. What would be the difference between, let's say I've got a male psychopath and a female. How will she manifest her traits differently than the male?
I think the level of manipulation is different. I think psychopaths are known for their manipulation. Hers is much more emotionally volatile, more like the borderline, the up and down kind of stuff that makes it feel more borderline-ish. And I think there's a lot more sexual manipulation within the relationships. I think they manipulate much more on the emotional, I hate you, don't leave me kinds of stuff that we're familiar with borderlines. Yet, on a higher, more callous level, that meets more of the psychopathy piece of it. And usually very sexually violent and sexually manipulative.
Mm-hmm. Well, so far so good with character. But now it's also true too that whether it's a man or woman, they can commit a crime or do something that's really against the societal norm when it comes to harming, and they don't really they don't necessarily contemplate it afterwards. They just go on like, it was like a lunch break, and then just kind of go on with the next phase or whatever. Am I correct in that?
Yes. I mean, short of talking about a serial killer who's, much more obsessive about the details of what they just did, but short of not talking about that psychopathy related to serial killing, no, whatever happens. They are very, very much here and now. And again, that's related to conscience. People who have a conscience replay what happened, what they did, what the other person said, much less with people in that low conscience spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so in other words, they could do something horrendous, and I mean, if they were working for the U.S. government in one of those prisons that were in Iraq, they could do something really nasty and then just go talk about sports or something with their friends afterwards and not even think about it.
Right, exactly. Nothing is ever, related to their behavior. So, everything's always, if something bad happens, it's always generated from someone else's behavior. I mean, part of pathology is the inability to have insight about how your negative behavior affects others. So it would never be their fault. Whatever happened, whether they beat somebody up or whatever they did, it would never be about their own behavior. So yes, they are, quick to move on to get reoriented to the here and now.
Mm-hmm. Now, it sounds like a psychopath that, I mean, obviously, since they're not all in jail, then some of them must find a way to deal with society in general and to at least work within the confines. Have you found that psychopaths are more cognitively oriented in the sense that they look at everything from maybe the old business school thing, the cost versus the benefits, the cost-benefit analysis? Is that the way they make decisions?
Mm-hmm. Well, everything is an opportunity. Paul Babiak and Robert Hare wrote Snakes in Suits, which talked about the rise of white-collar psychopathy in our country, and because low conscience serves well in certain careers, and so for psychopaths, everything is an opportunity, and when there's not the hindrance of conscience, of feeling bad about anything you have to do in order to achieve and reach, that opportunity, then the sky's the limit. And it is why psychopathy is often referred to and looked at as a skill set. And it is a skill set.
Mm-hmm. Hey, real quick question. The thing is, it seems to me that there must be some sort of ability if the person is at low emotional level. In some ways, that sounds like Asperger's syndrome, and I know it's actually in many ways there's an overlap, but almost opposite. At least that's the way I understand it. In that maybe as children they start out not being able to understand emotion, but what do you think enables them to be able to mimic emotions so much better than, people I know that have Asperger? They have to take classes on how to learn how to look at facial features to determine if this person's angry or sad or whatever. What enables the psychopath to almost be able to do this at the subconscious level without actually feeling the emotions that actually an Asperger would, except they don't know how to express it?
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, absolutely. And again, that goes back to the issue about the skill set that they are psychopathic, from childhood. And so, as a child being raised, and is struggling with not having the entire emotional spectrum of feelings, they have to learn to compensate for that, and have to learn early on how to compensate for not having the full emotional spectrum. So they become little human psychologists. They do learn to that when someone's face looks like this, then you say this. And to me, even though Asperger's has the low emotionality and those kinds of factors, it's not generated from the same thing as in psychopathy. But, psychopathic children have decades in order to perfect the skill set that makes them, as Hervé Cleckley said, that the mask of sanity that helps them to appear normal in society. So they learn very early on how to compensate for things they don't feel, and for things that they can't emotionally generate in relationship to non-pathological people.
Mm-hmm. So, in other words, if they see their friends maybe sad over something that's happened, and they don't feel anything, they may start wondering, well, I must be different because I don't feel anything, but people are going to think I'm weird if I don't show some sort of sympathy, at least outward signs of sympathy.
Right. Exactly. I mean, that's where they learn that compensational skill of mimicking and parroting is early on. I had a psychopathic male in group years ago, and he talked about having come home from school. He was younger. He had an older sibling who was not psychopathic, and they came home, and their mom was there. She was on the couch crying. She had a black eye, and she said, your dad hurt me, and he left, and I don't know how we're going to make it. And the non-pathological child went to her and comforted her. He patted her. He said, I'll get a newspaper route. We can move in with Grandma and Grandpa. He showed empathy. The psychopathic child didn't have a reaction, didn't verbalize anything, and said he thought in his mind at that moment, good, I always hated that bastard. I'm glad he left. But never verbalized it. And the mother said, boys, go outside so I can, regroup myself here. And so when they went outside, the non-pathological brother said to him, what is wrong with you? she was hurt, she was crying, and you just stood there with this blank look on your face and you did nothing. And the non-pathological brother punches the psychopath in the eye. And the psychopath said he learned at that time, in that moment, that he did not have the same skill set, that there was something different with him, that he should have felt something he didn't feel, and he should have done something that he didn't do, and that behaviors and emotions were connected, and that he did not feel that connection. And then, since he never wanted to get punched in the eye again, what did he have to learn to do in order for that not to happen? And he talked about early on in his childhood, learning about mimicking and parroting, about the skill set he needed to develop to compensate for what he was not internally experiencing.
So it's similar to if you're a character actor in a movie and there's a scene in which you have to display incredible fear or incredible joy or incredible sadness. Sometimes when you're first starting out, you have to stand in front of a mirror and try to mimic these things. And this is a process you say they have decades to do, and they can learn to do it so that they actually do seem genuine.
Well, it would be like, a scene in a play. As adults, we might stand in the mirror and practice, but they start practicing as children. They don't need to practice anymore. And, to a large degree, with neuroscience now, we know that, psychopathy has, a lot of hardwired features. And so the story I just told gives an example of sort of the emotional developmental issues related to psychopathy. But there's also, the neuro parts of psychopathy in which they are hardwired. And so, to a large degree, I'm not sure that the ability to compensate has to be taught. I mean, I think, again, it goes to the hardwired skill set that for some, during the emotional development period, they may realize they don't have skills that other people have, and they learn to compensate. And I think that there are other types of psychopaths that are just naturally hardwired, that they don't even have to think about compensation. It just naturally occurs for them.
Very